I'm Darren Sweeney, and some of you know me as the part-time youth director here at Dungeness Community Church. But my full-time position is with a ministry called Hope 61 that works in human trafficking prevention all around the world. This is such a horrible evil in our world today, and many people feel like slavery ended in the 1800s. But there's more people enslaved today than all the rest of history combined. I have heard some conservative estimates say over 20 million people are trafficked every year. And I've heard others that say over 40 million people. I know that this breaks the Lord's heart. I started working with Hope 61 in 2019 and was just asked to lead the ministry as the global director. So many of you have partnered with us on this journey, and I just want to say thank you. We are all on this mission together. At the beginning of 2020, I had the opportunity to go to India and conduct multiple trainings around the country. Here's a video from that trip.
We are glad that Hope 61 has undertaken this project on the subject of human trafficking. I consider it as a great social evil, but neither the church nor the public in general are aware of that social evil as much as you would want them to.
First, these traffickers promise them a good job, good money, good living conditions, and then they push them into very hopeless situations.
Hope 61 is a ministry that seeks to raise awareness and equip local churches all around the world through evangelism and intentional discipleship, how to create an environment where human trafficking just simply can't exist.
Hope 61 conducts engaged trainings all around the world. An engaged training consists of a one-day training where we train the local church leaders on what human trafficking is, why the church needs to be involved, and how the church can prevent human trafficking in their area. This is so important because if every church and every community were to reach out to the vulnerable people in their areas, we would create an environment and a community where human trafficking could not exist.
And really, my heart was broken when I heard when the Reverend Darren was explaining all those things, how the people are suffering throughout the world. And really, my heart was broken.
Today onwards, I'll start to tell about this. Some people, they didn't come here, so I shared whatever you gave training today. I'll share that.
This has created the awareness to look into their own church, their own community, and also they can change part of the society so that this kind of vulnerable things can be stopped by proper education.
Hope 61 is a blessed training to identify ourselves with the people as God loves everybody. Individual can also have an impact, and I certainly believe through the power of the Holy Spirit, through power of the Holy God, I can really bring a change.
Human trafficking is one of the biggest evils that is infecting the world today. The reality is that human trafficking takes a person, a unique and loved creation of God, and turns them into a commodity. I can't think of anything worse than taking a person and stripping them of the dignity of the image of God that they were created with and using them for profit or for someone else's gain.
At the end of every training, people develop a plan on how they are going to use their gifts and skills and talents to reach out to the community and prevent human trafficking in their area. And it is so encouraging to not only see the plans that people come up with, but even to see how they are implemented and just the effect that they are having in communities all around the world. When we hear these stories, it gives us the opportunity to see how God is working through the ministry of Hope 61. This trip was so fruitful that I was scheduled to make another 2 trips to India in 2020 to train some national trainers. Unfortunately, those trips were postponed due to the pandemic. I recently had the chance to sit down with Tom Overton, the former director, to discuss Hope 61 and what we do. I hope that you enjoy this interview, and if you have any questions, please feel free to give me a call or send me an email. Hi DCC, this is Darren Sweeney, the new Global Director of Hope 61. I have the privilege of sitting here with Tom Overton, the former global director of Hope 61, that I've had the opportunity to work alongside the last couple of years and learn from, and just it's been such a privilege just to be able to spend time and get to know you.
Well, you know how much I appreciate you, and it's so good to be here in person with you. You know, over the past year or so, we've spent so much time on Zoom or on email, phone calls, that kind of stuff, and nothing replaces in-person fellowship and in-person opportunity to just be together. And so it's a real blessing for me to be here, and glad we had the opportunity to do this.
Absolutely. And community is just so important, and that's what we're really seeing right now through all of this, through the pandemic, just the importance of that.
It really is. You know, if we are created in the image of God, which the Bible tells us that we are, then we are created for community. We're created to be around others. And that has been a challenge in these pandemic-related times.
Yeah, originally we were going to do this interview over Skype or Zoom, and so I'm excited that you're here and we can do this in person. Yeah,
it's great to be here and really excited about our time together.
Yeah, absolutely. So Hope 61 is a ministry of One Mission Society that works in human trafficking prevention.
Yes.
And so tell me how you got involved with this in the first place.
Well, way back in 2011, my wife was on the mission committee at our church, and the founder of Hope 61 came to the mission committee meeting and talked about Hope 61, talked about what they were trying to do with Hope 61 and One Mission Society to prevent human trafficking, and my wife was just broken by that. And so she came home and she was talking to me about it, and we really didn't know much about human trafficking, to be honest with you. But we realized after that conversation that we had to be involved somehow. And so we began to look for ways to volunteer in the ministry to help out. And then through a series of events that God orchestrated over the next probably 6 to 8 weeks, we found ourselves not only volunteering for the ministry, but being asked to apply to become missionaries with One Mission Society and ultimately to lead Hope 61. And so it was really my wife's desire to do something about this issue that created that need in me to do something about it. And then together we were able to go into this, me professionally for a while as working in the ministry, and then she came along a couple years later to begin working in the ministry as well. And today she serves as the associate director of the ministry and is intimately involved in all the ministry around the world.
You know, and it was so interesting just to see some of the similarities between our journeys. The first time I met you was after we came back from Mozambique, and just wanted to learn more about all the different ministries of One Mission Society. And as we got to talk, you know, I came from banking before I joined One Mission, and you also were in banking, and so that was kind of a cool
There's a connection point for us.
Yeah. That not everyone understands, you
Absolutely.
know. And so it was interesting.
And not everybody has the banker to missionary journey like you and I shared.
Which is interesting. Definitely different worlds.
Yeah, for sure.
But, and then I just have to say, you know, I was able to learn a little bit the first time we met, and then you guys called and asked if I wanted to come to a train the trainer training called the Multiply Training for Hope 61. And it happened to be in the Northwest. You're from Indiana, headquarters is in Indiana, and that's also where Crazy Rob decided to come up and took the same training. But, you know, taking that training was literally life-changing for me.
Sure.
I knew that this was going on out there. I knew that there was an issue, but after going the training, you know, I called my wife after, it was a 3-day training, and I think after the second day, and just started talking to her and figuring out we need to do something about this, and how do we do that?
Yeah, you know, one of my wife's favorite quotes is regarding human trafficking and our response and kind of our the way we look at it is, the quote goes something like, you can choose to look the other way, but you can never again say that you didn't know what was going on. And so I think that really is applicable in our lives, but also in your call as well, as you and Sherry Lynn decided to get involved. You know, you knew you could not look away anymore. You knew the truth, you knew what was going on, and you had to do something about it. And I think that's an awesome opportunity that God used to get you guys involved in the ministry.
Absolutely. And you weren't even at that training, so I actually got to know your wife better before I got to know you.
My wife is definitely the better trainer and the better representative of the ministry. So if I would have been there, maybe you wouldn't have decided to join up. But we send her to the places that we want to make the most impact. I'm just kidding, of course. But yeah, that was a great training. There's a lot of fruit came from that training, and we are beyond blessed that you were part of that training and that you've jumped on in a very significant role with Hope 61 over these last couple of years, and now as you begin to take leadership of the ministry, really looking forward to how God's going to use you and use your passions to really impact the world and His people. Well,
thank you. I'm excited. You know, it's definitely there's nervousness there. I mean, there's just the weight of this ministry, and it's so important, and it impacts so many people, and so there's definitely a little nervousness there, but I'm just really excited to have this opportunity, and then to still be able to work alongside you,
yes.
You know, in this situation. So,
yeah, I think it's a perfect situation for a leadership transition, and I'm just very excited to see how God's going to use you. And if you weren't nervous, and if you felt like you had a handle on it, then you probably wouldn't be the right person for the position, because none of us are prepared to fight something like human trafficking, to wade into that evil, to wade into that decrepitness in the world without the help of God. We have to be tied to the leading of the Holy Spirit. We have to be listening and discerning God's will, and allowing Him to strengthen us, allowing Him to lead us into the various things, the trainings and the various things that we're involved with, because under our own strength, we don't have the power to fight against something as big as human trafficking.
And I would love to get your take and kind of hear the things that really stuck out to you as far as about human trafficking when you first started to learn. I know for me, it's sitting in that training down in Portland, Oregon with Tanya, and hearing about how prevalent it was. And I know it's really hard because it's always done in secret. There's not, like, you can't go on with a census and count how many people are being trafficked. But just, you know, it's something that I knew was happening every once in a while. But I had no idea that it was the second leading criminal industry in the world.
Yeah, the size and scope of human trafficking is almost too big to comprehend. It's the number of people that are involved, and the various ways in which they're held in slavery, and the various things that they have to do or they're forced to do within the scope of human trafficking is mind-boggling. And I think I share that with you as something that really grabbed a hold of me. The two things I think that in addition to the size and the scope of the problem is that it's happening here in the U.S. I always thought what little I knew about human trafficking, I thought happened somewhere else. You know, it happened in Southeast Asia, it happened in Europe or somewhere else, but it certainly couldn't happen in my own backyard. And so understanding that human trafficking is happening in virtually every neighborhood around the world, on every continent, in every country, every city, it's amazing to believe that this depravity could be happening in that widespread of a manner. So that was a significant issue to me. And then just the idea of vulnerability. You know, you think about people who are living in poverty, you think about different things that are difficult life circumstances for people. But the vulnerability that creates, and how easy it is for someone to go from living a life that is just a kind of a normal life in their culture, in their geographic area, how quickly that vulnerability can be exploited to get them involved in something that would affect the rest of their life was really transformational to me. And as we look at prevention, the vulnerability that causes someone to get involved in human trafficking becomes our primary focus. Because if we can reduce the vulnerability, then we have an opportunity to prevent them from being involved in trafficking. So that vulnerability really stood out to me. You know, I understood poverty, but I didn't really understand how poverty could create a situation that could turn on a dime and all of a sudden someone's life has changed forever. That was very transformational for me as I learned about those kind of things. Well,
you know, one thing that was interesting too, to kind of go along with what you're saying, people talk about, okay, well, people are surprised that it happens in the United States, but they also feel like, okay, it happens in the big cities,
Sure.
but it doesn't happen, anywhere else. And when I first started getting involved, I started researching in just things here in the Sequim, Port Angeles areas, and was shocked. Like, they had a sting a couple years ago where they arrested 10 people. And I actually had a chance to sit down with one of the detectives that was a part of it. And he told me the only reason we stopped at 10 people, and these were all buyers, was because we didn't have the manpower to keep going. And so for me, that was just really eye-opening, that not only is it happening everywhere, not only is it happening in the big cities, but it's literally happening in our area.
Sure. And really the same thing for us as well. And it's easy for us, and we're talking about sex trafficking now in what you're talking about, this sting. And a similar thing happened in the little suburb that I live in Indiana. We live in a suburb just outside of Indianapolis, the capital city of Indiana, and we had a similar sting operation a few years ago where the number of people that were involved in our little small suburb was shocking. But one of the things that we have to remember is that yes, sex trafficking is part of human trafficking,
right.
and we see that maybe more in our media, in our news, things like the stories that we just talked about in our own communities. But human trafficking is so much bigger than just sex trafficking, and so that's a real focus of Hope 61 also, is to not just stop at the sex trafficking piece, but to really identify all opportunities to prevent human trafficking.
And that was one thing from that training that really hit me as well, is because that is mainly what we hear
Sure.
from the media, is just because it's the most shocking is about sex trafficking, but to hear how common labor trafficking still is around the world,
Right.
as well as organ trafficking and child soldiering, again, things that you don't realize or think, and that if they are out there, it's kind of one-off situations,
Sure.
but to realize how much of that is going on is, and even in the United States.
Absolutely, and to a certain extent, it's systemic, and it's not a one-off type of scenario in many cases at all. It does happen that way, but in so many areas, it's systemic. It's large employment agency, kind of false front employment agencies that are transporting hundreds or thousands of people every year to jobs that don't exist, to a situation where they think might transform their lives in a positive way. I've finally gotten a good job. I have a good job in another country. I can send money back to my family. This is going to be such a great, maybe even believing it's a great blessing from God that they've been given this opportunity, only to get to where they're going and realize that it was all a scam. It was all a fake opportunity, and now they've found themselves in a place where they can't get out. They've had their papers and identification taken away. They're in a foreign place where they don't speak the language, they don't understand the culture, and they're stuck in literal slavery to their masters, and that becomes a really systemic problem, not just a there's a really bad guy over there doing bad things. This issue is very well orchestrated and very well managed in a number of different places around the world.
Our first trip together that we went on to do some trainings was to Uganda. And just in the Ugandan airport, before we even leave, we see these large groups of people all wearing matching t-shirts, because people just feel like, well, there's matching t-shirts, of course this is a real company. And I remember you telling me these people are with an employment agency, some of which are real and some aren't. And so unfortunately, they don't really know until they get there.
Well, and that's really the hard part, is that there are great employment agencies that are doing this very legitimately and giving people wonderful opportunities, and there are organizations that aren't. And so picking those out in an airport is almost impossible to know which ones are legitimate and which ones aren't. And so the goal of Hope 61 is to get them impacted or interacted with before they go into the airport, before they begin to leave, to make sure that the opportunity is legitimate before they just blindly go off. And so awareness, just making people aware is such an important thing. Tell me more about your first trip to Uganda, as you learned about human trafficking in your training, and then we worked together a little bit, and then off we flew to Uganda to begin to see the ministry in real life on the ground. What were some of the things that maybe you took away from that time, besides the large number of people at the airport and so forth that you saw? What are some other things that stuck out to you from that trip?
You know what? One of the things that really stuck out to me was just seeing the need, because here in the United States, even though there is a need and there is so much of it going on, it's so hidden and you don't realize it. And so being there and being in a place where you are able to see it a lot more, or at least see opportunities, see the vulnerabilities a lot more, really blew me away. And you know, one of the first trainings, actually the first one-day training, which Hope 61 we call the Engage training, that we did, we drove up to a place called Adjumani, and we went to a training, and there were over 300 people, most of which were refugees from South Sudan that had come down into Uganda.
Yeah, Adjumani's right on the border of Uganda and South Sudan, so a ton of refugees in that area.
And so to see the training in a place where people are so hungry to hear it, and it's so eye-opening and so beneficial for them, really was one of those things where that's where, at this point, I knew, like, I was able to see firsthand the difference that Hope 61 makes and can make. And along with that, the difference that it can make, we then had the opportunity to sit down with Justine. And Justine was about to go work for one of these employment agencies, and they were helping her get her passport. And the same day she was picking up her passport, her pastor was in a Hope 61 training. And he even told us later that normally when she came, I would have prayed for her and sent her on her way. But as she came and told him what was going on, he had just done this training. He said, okay, time out. Let's sit down. Let's talk about this a little bit. Started asking questions that she didn't have the answer to. And through that was able to, they kind of figured out that they felt like she was about to be trafficked.
Absolutely.
And so we're able to not do that. And so to me, that was just another opportunity, because working in prevention, and we'll talk a little bit about why prevention in a minute, but working in prevention, you don't have the great stats and the great numbers to show, like, this is how many people we've rescued or all this. So prevention, it's so important, but hearing stories like that, you see why.
Absolutely.
Why we do what we do.
Yeah, and you know, the great thing about Justine is not only was she prevented from being trafficked, but now she is developed a gift of sewing, and now she's making dresses for people in her community and selling those dresses instead of having to go overseas for a job. She's figured out a way to make an income at home, and she's also teaching other young people how to sew and make dresses. And as her pastor said, I'm sure you remember this, she's the biggest evangelist for Jesus we have in the community, thanking Jesus and telling everyone about Jesus and how her pastor and the church gave her the opportunity for a new life and to not go into that. And so Justine's story is one of those that just really sticks with you, because you can see the joy in someone's life that could have been so different. Could have been a much different story for Justine, and to see how God is using her and the joy that she has in her current life, and it's a real eye-opening thing. You know, you mentioned prevention being hard to measure, and I think that's a really difficult thing for any of us to be comfortable with. You know, we always want to understand how we're making impact. We want to know that what we're doing is providing some good to someone. And oftentimes in Hope 61 and any other ministry or any other prevention work in general, it's very hard to judge impact. And so we hang on tight to stories like Justine, because it's those stories that we can see with our own eyes what the impact of Hope 61 is around the world and right here at home also.
So one thing I'd love to actually ask you about, because I love hearing this story. So tell me about the first, we talked about the Engage training. Tell me about the first Engage training you did and the story kind of leading up to that situation.
That was in India, and we had a meeting in our mission agency headquarters. We had partners from all over the world were in Greenwood, Indiana, for a meeting, and I got to talking to a guy about Hope 61 and human trafficking prevention, and he said, there's a lady here that I want you to meet. I think you need to meet her. And so I said, sure, that would be great. And so a few minutes later, he took me over to introduce me to a lady by the name of Ruth Duraswamy. Ruth is about 4'8", maybe 4'9" on a good day. And so we were talking about Hope 61 and human trafficking prevention, and she said, we need this in India. We need this training in our Indian churches. She represents a denomination that OMS planted and kind of birthed back in the 1940s, and has grown now to over 10,000 churches across India, and it's a wonderful denomination, really honoring and glorifying God in everything that they do. And so she began to say, we need this training in our churches. We need this. And so I gave the typical missionary response. I said, Ruth, that's great. Let me work on recruiting someone to come. It'll take a little while to recruit them, and then once they get on board, then they'll have to raise their support. And just as soon as we can get someone there, we'll get someone there. And she looked at me with a powerful set of eyes and kind of extended her hand and her finger to me, and she said,
all 4'8" of her.
All 4'8" of her. Yeah, I was just captivated by the power and presence of God in her. And she said, we can't wait that long. You come. And I said, well, maybe it won't take too long. We'll get someone there soon. She goes, no, you come. And so I was not going to tell Ruth no. In that case, I was quite honestly a little frightened of what might happen if I told her no. So I said, Ruth, I'll be there. And so we set off on our very first Engage training, and you talked about being nervous, and as you kind of step into some new responsibilities and so forth, there is nobody on this planet that's ever been more nervous than me as I got on that airplane to fly to India. I'd never been to India before. I didn't know what I was getting myself into. All I knew that I was going to go do 4 of these Engage trainings in 4 different cities, starting with the one in Chennai, India, where Ruth lived and the denomination is based. We were going to start there for the very first one, and I had no idea what was going to happen. And so we went. I was told that everybody that was going to be at the training spoke English well enough that we didn't need a translator. And so I jumped into the training and started to talk, and about 15 or 20 minutes into the training, I was looking at the faces of the people that were in there, and I could tell they weren't understanding anything that I was saying. And so I asked if we could have a translator come, if someone could translate for me. And so we kind of on the fly switched to a translator, and the fruit that came from that first training. And again, our training has developed over time. It's been polished, and we've learned and we've adapted and adjusted the training over the course of the last 6 or 7 years. But that initial training was not overly polished. It was our first effort. We were just trying to follow the Lord's leading in it. But the way that the Lord used that training to really establish our presence in India. We've had the opportunity to go back to India several times. You were on a trip right before the pandemic hit to do, I think we did 4 more trainings in that training, that trip. The only difference there was you were the main trainer for those trainings, and I was a little bit more along for the ride. And so it was a joy to be back in India. And again, like you said, the fruit that we've seen there has been immense. Because it's a place of tremendous vulnerability for a number of different reasons, and we don't have time to go into all that today. But for a number of different reasons, India is a very vulnerable place, and so the opportunity for Hope 61 to be active and engaged there has been a real blessing from God.
Absolutely, and it was so great to go back and see and feel like I was on special ground, because this was the first place where Hope 61 had started the Engage trainings, and so to be in that same place and meet the same people and to meet Ruth. Yeah. I mean, in person was very, very cool.
Yeah, I'm really glad to be able to look back on what God did with that training. I'm really glad there wasn't a video or an audio recording of that first training, because I'd probably be pretty embarrassed about how choppy it was. But again, as I said earlier, God's in control. He can use even our weaknesses and even our stumbles to glorify himself and to provide benefit for his people. And so it was the first, always will be kind of hallowed ground for Hope 61. And yet the Lord's also given us an opportunity to do the trainings in so many other places now as well.
Well, I just have to say too, you have been so wonderful to work alongside. And, I remember my first training. We were in Southeast Asia, and I got up and, again, just talking about the weight of the subject.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about human trafficking, and we're talking about people's lives being turned upside down, and just, it's so horrific. And I just remember being so nervous. I have to make sure I hit every single little thing. So I'd made an outline, and so my first training, I'm up there reading my outline, just line by line. And I just remember you taking me off to the side because, like you described your India training, it was not the most engaging. And just taking me off to the side and just kind of calming me down and just helping me realize the point isn't to hit every single little thing, but the point is to help people understand what human trafficking is and then how to help prevent it in their area. And so it just calmed down. And from there, just the opportunity to kind of get better each training has been so great. But man, I remember after that first training when you wanted to go for a walk going, that's it. Like, this is my second trip with Hope 61 and I'm done. He's gonna ask me to step away. And so it's just been such a privilege, and it really wouldn't have been the same without you and your response there.
Well, we're all humans. We all have our gifts and our talents, our abilities, our natural abilities and our learned abilities. There are things that I'm good at because it's just naturally given from God, and there are things that I'm good at because I've honed them and practiced and done things to get better. And yet we're all servants of God, and so your presentation may have been a little choppy, but your heart was in the right place. And I think that's a really important lesson for all of us, that if our heart is pure, our heart is directed toward God, even though we might perceive missteps, we might perceive deficiencies or faults in what we're doing for God, if our hearts are turned to Him and we're desperately trying to serve Him well, God will make beautiful music from our missed chords and our missed notes. And I think you were a great example of that. And your relational ability, your opportunity, your giftedness in relating to people from different cultures and different life experiences is a beautiful gifting for Hope 61. And we've seen that after we got through that first training, we've seen that blossom over the course of the last couple of years in how God has used you and how God has continued to refine you, never changing that broken heart that you have toward His people and how they're being treated so terribly in the issue of human trafficking. We don't want that to be fixed. We want to have a broken heart for what breaks the heart of God. But the way that you've been able to grow into that role, the way you've been able to become more confident and more comfortable with the trainings and the ministry in itself, and to manage the weight of the ministry. We can all manage weights heavier than what we think as long as we get them situated properly on our back. And so it's been a joy to see you go through that process as well, and to take the next step is such a blessing to all of us.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And I did want to make sure that while we're here too, we talked about prevention.
Yeah.
So, with human trafficking, there are people that work with governments to change laws. There are people that rescue those that are being trafficked. There are people that have places that women or men can go after they've been trafficked to kind of help adjust back to normal life as much as they can. And so Hope 61 doesn't do those things, and they're all needed and they're all really important, but Hope 61 focuses on prevention.
Yes.
So how did you guys kind of come up with that at the beginning when you decided that was the focus that you wanted to do?
That's a great question, and we get asked that a lot, and you've been asked that a lot as well. The honest truth is that you're exactly right. We need people working in all facets of the human trafficking response if we are to have any hope of making an impact, making a difference. And so those that are doing rescue and rehabilitation, those that are doing legislative advocacy, I mean, they are doing exceptionally important work. And so we don't want to minimize that by saying what we focus on. But long ago, as our founder was stepping out and I was stepping into the leadership role of Hope 61, she left me with two important pieces of advice. At that point, Hope 61 was not a whole lot more than an idea, kind of a desire that, hey, we need to do something about this, but we don't know exactly what yet. And so she said, Tom, this ministry is yours. I want you to feel complete freedom to do whatever God leads you to do with it, but I want two things to be central to whatever you do. She said, I want whatever response we have needs to be based in Scripture. It needs to be tied to biblical justice, and that's why we're fighting this, because it absolutely violates God's code of justice. These are people that are made and created in the image of God, that God loves, that are being treated as objects, as a commodity. It has to be based in the Bible. The second thing she said is it really needs to involve the local church. The local church, the founders of Hope 61 were church planters at heart. They had planted a church that had grown into a denomination in the Philippines, and so they understood the value of the local church. And so thinking about those two things, how can we create a response that is biblically based and connected or tied to the local church? We started to think about those various ways. Well, could we do legislative advocacy? Could we work with laws? And we quickly came to the conclusion that the church really doesn't have much influence in the government. I mean, there are people in the church that have maybe some individual influence, but the church in general, whether it's here in the United States or around the world, doesn't have much influence. And so the local church really doesn't have the posture or the standing to inform legislation. That would be difficult. Then we talked about rescue and restoration, and the church isn't equipped to do rescue operations, to do police or military style rescue operations, and certainly not equipped to handle rehabilitation of people who have experienced trauma that we can't believe. These people need experienced and informed trauma care. The church is wonderful at praying and bringing meals and putting their hands around people and supporting them in any way they can. But these people are in desperate need of professional help. And so the church really isn't equipped for that. And so then we started thinking about prevention. And prevention is one of those things that it's common sense, right? It's always better to stop something bad from happening before it happens than to clean the mess up after it happens.
Right.
And so while prevention is common sense, it's also very easy to push off until tomorrow or some other time. If you're a rescue organization and there are people that need rescued, you're not going to be worried about, well, we can prevent this from happening to other people. You're going to go help the people that need help right now. And so we thought prevention doesn't get a lot of publicity, or it's not a lot of people that are doing that. So maybe that's a place that Hope 61 could make a bigger impact. And then we started to think, well, what is prevention really? What are we trying to get to? And I mentioned this earlier, that if vulnerability is causing people to get involved in human trafficking, then how do we identify that vulnerability, and how do we help reduce that vulnerability? Well, the local church sits in the community. It's made up of people from the community. They're very familiar with what's causing vulnerability in their areas. You know what the hurts and the struggles are here in Sequim. I know what the hurts and the struggles are in central Indiana, because we live here and we're involved in the community. We understand the culture and various things. And so we thought, not only is the church connected in the community and they're in the community, but it also has the only thing that's going to really make a difference. Quite honestly, human trafficking is a sin problem. Human trafficking exists in the world today because sin exists. Right. We have in the local church the only antidote to sin. That's the gospel of Jesus Christ and the influence of the Holy Spirit in our hearts to change us from sinful, depraved human beings into something different, more appropriate to the image of God that we were created for before sin kind of captured our hearts and sent us astray. And so we mixed those two things together and said, not only do we have this antidote to the problem in Jesus Christ, we have a group of people that are in the community and familiar with the vulnerabilities. We also have a tremendous number of gifts and talents and abilities that exist in all of our churches. Each one of us has gifts and talents and abilities that God has given us. And if we could leverage those gifts and talents, we could create an army of people that would go out into the community, interacting with the vulnerable with those gifts and talents and abilities, and then sharing the gospel with them, bringing them back into the community of the church. That really reduces vulnerability. And so as we looked at OMS, our parent ministry, OMS has been planting churches for over 100 years. Right. We have tens of thousands of churches that we're connected with all over the world. And so how could our little small 2 or 3 person ministry in Greenwood, Indiana impact the world? Well, if we could train and equip those churches, then there could be a crazy opportunity for millions of people to be affected and impacted in a positive way through that. And so that's really why we dedicated ourselves to prevention, because it really is the local church that has the best opportunity, and you could even say a biblical responsibility, to engage in the issues and problems in their community and to help out with that. And so that's why we focus solely on prevention.
Well, and one of the things you talked about too, you talked about everyone having gifts and skills and talents, and it's one of those things where so often people we talk to are like, well, I thought about doing something, but if only I had more money, or if only I had this. And so that's one thing that I've loved, is the fact that we go, okay, forget about what you don't have.
Yep.
Let's talk about what you do have. And through the training, we talk about what gifts and skills and talents do you have, and people kind of identify that. And then, we kind of go on and we talk about the responsibility of the church, why the church needs to be involved with people that are vulnerable. And you mentioned, sharing Christ, but during the training, we come up with a plan on how to take their gifts and skills and talents, share that with people that are vulnerable, to kind of bring them into their community, help them be less vulnerable, and then through that, kind of earning the right then to also tell them about Jesus.
Sure.
Because they're seeing the fact that these people are loving them in a different way.
Absolutely.
And I also love, you mentioned why we do prevention. And one of the things in the trainings that my original training that stuck out was, prevention is so important. And I remember Tanya talking about, and if we tried to do multiple things, if we tried to do prevention and rescue, or prevention and aftercare, you mentioned some of the reasons that the church isn't equipped as a whole to do that, but also you're always going to be so focused on whatever's the most urgent.
Sure.
You're always going to be focused on the rescue and the aftercare, because those are the immediate needs that you're seeing that have to be done, that prevention is just kind of, as you said, put off till tomorrow.
Yeah.
So it's so important that there's someone that really focuses on prevention and gets that word out and around the world.
You're exactly right, and that doesn't mean that singular focus doesn't come with some challenges, because it honestly does, and you've been able to see these. Our ministry is not a silver bullet that we can go into a community and come up with some strategy to stop human trafficking in the next day or two. It's not that. It's a long-term game. It's a relational game. It takes the church and the members of the church, the people in the church community, to dedicate themselves and to be committed to developing relationships with people who are vulnerable, to being interested in them long enough to earn that right you mentioned earlier, to earn that position of trust with them. That's a long game, and so it's not a silver bullet type of ministry. And then we touched on the other challenge, which is just the really inability to measure success, and that's hard when we're talking to churches. It's hard when we're talking to donors. It's hard when we're talking to anyone to say, well, tell me about your statistics, because in America and the U.S. we love ministry statistics and so forth, and we have to say, we can tell you stories. We can tell you stories of impact. We can introduce you to people whose lives have been changed by this, but we don't know how many people that we've prevented from becoming involved in human trafficking. It's also not a 2 + 2 = 4 equation. there are pastors that come to our training, or church people that come to our training, that might still get involved because they still fell for a trap that there was just a very lucrative opportunity or something, and there are people that never hear about prevention or Hope 61 or any of the things that we train on, that'll never get trafficked anyway. And so it's a difficult game, and we just really have to trust God and know that we're living out God's will for our lives, and that's good enough for us to keep going. And so again, prevention is important to focus on, but it's not without its challenges also.
Absolutely. And it's been really difficult. One of the difficult things about the pandemic is it's creating so many vulnerable people.
Sure.
So many people that fall into that category that are going to be desperate as soon as things kind of start to open up to find ways to support their families better. And that's been one of the things where I know it's also been hard for us to find that balance of at what point do we go out and start traveling and training more trainers, because we want to be ahead of the world opening up, because it's just going to explode.
Sure. Well, and I think two things come to mind as you say that. First of all, you're exactly right. I mean, instability in our lives forces vulnerability or increases vulnerability, and boy, have we seen some instability in our world. We've seen political instability. We've seen economic instability with people losing jobs, and many people around the world can't just go to Costco and stock up with 2 or 3 weeks worth of groceries and ride out a lockdown or isolation. Many people are going to work, they're making a couple dollars, they're stopping by the market on the way home to get their food, and then they're going home and cooking it, and then doing the same thing again tomorrow, and forced with a 2 week or a month lockdown. That completely disrupts their entire economic well-being and their ability to move on. And so economic stability, government stability, or instability really has created massively increased vulnerability. I think one of the things you've done such a great job in your previous role as the global training manager has been to train and equip national workers to do our trainings. And so how beautiful was it that while we can't travel to Uganda, we can't travel to Haiti, and other places that we have ministry, the people that have been trained to be Hope 61 trainers in their own country have been able to continue doing these trainings, even though we've not been able to travel. And so what a beautiful testament to equipping others to do the work, where it doesn't rely on Darren and Tom and Tanya to go and be the ministry of Hope 61. We've equipped others through your work and your dedication to giving them the opportunity to train their own people. And we've seen even in 2020, we in being shut down completely for about 6 months, we almost trained as many people in 2020 as we did in 2019, even with the pandemic restrictions. And boy, how important were those trainings in 2020 because of the increased vulnerability that you talked about. It was really only God that allowed us to think through that and be positioned well for something like the pandemic to happen.
And it was such a blessing too that there were people that came alongside and donated extra.
Yes.
And so we've had the privilege of our trainers being able to do twice as many trainings for a certain amount of months after they were able to start doing trainings again, because we want to get the word out.
Absolutely. Yeah, the more people that can hear the message of Hope 61, the more we can prevent human trafficking. And so the opportunity, like you said, to increase the frequency of our trainings as places in the world began to open up was a huge blessing and a huge opportunity that was given to us through the generosity of some donors that allowed us to have the finances, have the resources to be able to do that.
So with our trainers around the world, that's been one of the key things too, like you were saying, that, you and I are pretty limited on how many trips we can go and where we can go. And, you've mentioned before, you've had the grand idea of trying to go, okay, I'm going to go to 2 different countries on this trip. And that just, it's so much more difficult than it sounds.
Yeah.
So we've started training people in different countries to be trainers in their own country. And the great thing about that is they know their own language better than we do.
Sure.
They know their culture better than we do. They know where it's needed better than we do. I mean, they know so much more than we do about where they're at. Kind of like you were saying, I know Squim,
Right.
you know Indiana, Wilberforce knows Busia.
Yeah, Busia is in a rural part of Uganda, out on the Uganda-Kenya border. It's a beautiful, beautiful part of the world.
Yeah, they're right by Lake Victoria.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so I just think that's been such an important piece, is to really train nationals.
Even more so, Darren, one story that came out of one of our trainers in Haiti really was interesting to me, and he took our train the trainer training, the same one that you took in Portland, and we did that in the north part of Haiti with our 3 Hope 61 trainers that live there, and he did the trainings for about 8 months or 9 months, and then we went back to follow up with them, to check in how are things going, and to encourage them, and just to have some fellowship time with them. And he said something to me that was really interesting, and he said, Tom, we spend so much time in Haiti waiting for other people to help us. We wait at the docks for the ships to come with clothes from the United States or other donated materials, or we kind of sit around and wait for others to help us. And he said, as I've gone around and done these trainings, I think the trainings have been very impactful for the people that have received the trainings. He said, but the person who's been most impacted by these trainings has been me. As I've done these, I've begun to see a different future for Haiti. I began to see what you're talking about we do have gifts and talents and abilities. And as a side note, that's my favorite part of the training. You mentioned a little bit about our training and the gifts and talents and how we work through those through a plan and so forth. There is nothing better in the world than to be sitting in a small church, often with a dirt floor, barely have any roof on it, some tin up on the sides of the roof, and you go through the training, and the people are interested, and then you get to the part of the training where you start talking about, let's understand your gifts and your talents, and the first thing that they say is, I don't have anything. I'm just a poor rural African. I don't even have shoes on. How could I possibly have any gifts? And then you start talking about things like, who understands how to do farming, or who has a bicycle, or who has a knowledge about how to fix a motorcycle, or
who likes to play soccer.
Who likes to play soccer? And they start seeing, I do have gifts, and I do have abilities, and I do have talents. I'm important. Like, I have something to give back, and you start seeing these light bulbs go on in their head. And they leave this training renewed and encouraged that instead of looking at the things I don't have, I'm going to concentrate on the things that I do have. And what a blessing it is. You come out of one of those trainings and you have a big sheet of paper that has all these gifts and talents, and you're like, look at what God has given you. And that is my favorite part of the training. But going back to our trainer in Haiti, he said, I think if the church here truly understood that we could make a difference if we all use the gifts and talents and abilities that we already have, we could create a new Haiti. We could create a Haiti that's not dependent on waiting for clothes to come, used throwaway clothes from the United States. We could create a different Haiti. And that kind of mindset shift is really exciting to me as I think about how Hope 61 has the opportunity to transform our world. We can transform a mindset. Human trafficking is not okay. It's not okay to say, well, human trafficking's always been here. It's always going to be here. Let's just move on with our lives. God's bigger than that. If we can leverage the local church, we can truly end human trafficking. And as our trainers start to get that vision, and as churches and leaders in the church start to get that vision, a new reality begins to be embraced. And we can say, what, we can live in the way that God intended us to live. We can love each other, and we can forgive each other, and we can trust each other and treat each other equally. We can do that if we really understand the power that God's given us. That obviously gets me a little excited, but that's really, I think, the impact of Hope 61 as we talk about prevention and we talk about how we can really transform communities.
Well, and along those lines too, one of the things that we're seeing, most of our trainings are done to the Christian church, to church leaders or believers in different areas. But but also sometimes when there's trainings, other people just show up.
Absolutely.
They're like, hey, I'll go check that out. And one of the things we've seen in a lot of places, and I think about in Uganda quite a bit too, where people are actually coming to know the Lord because they're coming to these trainings, and not only are they hearing about who Jesus is, but they're hearing this training and hearing how the church wants to make an impact,
Sure.
like what the goal is, and they're going, you care enough about other people to want to sit here and take this training and then go out and do something about it. Well, I want to know more about why.
Absolutely.
And so it's been so amazing. And we've even seen churches planted because of trainings that have happened.
Absolutely.
And people going, I want this in my area, but we don't have a church.
Yeah, you know, that goes back to that original kind of exhortation from our founder to say we want it grounded in the Bible. And so every Hope 61 training, yes, we're a human trafficking prevention ministry, but every Hope 61 training has a full presentation of the gospel. Every Hope 61 training has scripture study in it where the participants are diving into scripture to see what God says in his word about the issue of trafficking and the issue of community and the issue of how we are to engage with each other and so forth. And so it has been truly a blessing to see people come to the Lord through the trainings, churches be planted because of the trainings, and the church to be given the opportunity to be seen as that true light in the darkness in their community. It's really a cool opportunity that God's given us.
Absolutely. And I just want to take this moment to just to say thank you to DCC and for just your support of my family, of me, as I serve with Hope 61. And I couldn't do it without the church, without individuals. Like, it has just been so meaningful. And so I just want to say thank you to you all. And all these stories you're hearing, all the impacts that God has shown me in my time here, it's because of you. So I just want to say thank you so much.
Well, if I could just add to that, and also as someone from Indiana and not part of the DCC community, I want to extend my thanks too, because there's nothing more important to a healthy missionary, to a healthy servant of God than a healthy home church relationship, and really knowing that you're not doing it alone. You're doing it as part of a family. We have a supporter on our support team who often reminds me. He says, Tom, Christianity is a team sport. We can't do Christianity as an individual. We have to do it as part of a team. And so many of you are on that team supporting Darren and his family in a number of different ways. And so I just wanted to add my deep appreciation and grateful heart for how you've loved Darren and his family well, and how you've released them to participate in the ministry that God's called them to. And again, I'm very, very thankful for that opportunity you've given to Darren.
And Tom, it was really interesting. When I started with Hope 61, beginning in 2019, man, we went on at least 4 or 5 trips together. And so got to see each other a lot in some tough situations. Yeah. We're tired, we're exhausted, we're going in situations that were very different from what we're used to. And then we go to 2020, and this is the second time I've seen you this year, or at least since our trip to India. Right. And so, man, it's been different, but thank you so much for coming and not just taking the time to be here and swim, but also for taking the time to sit down and talk about Hope 61. And so I really appreciate that. Well,
it is truly my honor to do that. As you can tell, I'm very passionate about the ministry of Hope 61, and always enjoy the opportunity to talk about the impact that it's having around the world, the impact it's had on me, and just so thankful for your presence in the ministry, so thankful for your leadership and the way that you've grown in the ministry, and as this next chapter opens and things change a little bit, I'm really excited to see what God is going to do through you and in you, and just thankful for our friendship, thankful for our brotherhood. As you said, we've been through some great mountaintop experiences, but we've also walked a few steps in the valley as well together. Yeah. And those kind of relationships where you've had that opportunity to share those things are priceless. So thank you for having me.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you, DCC. Thanks for watching. Edmund Burke once said, "The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing." Prevention starts with each of us, and if every lover of Jesus around the world were to reach out to vulnerable people in their areas and love them by creating community with them, we would live in a world where human trafficking could not exist. Please keep Hope 61 and vulnerable people all around the world in your prayers. We will be hosting an Engage Hope 61 training at DCC in the future when things open back up, and I ask that you pray about attending. We originally had one scheduled last year, but again, last year looked a little different than we thought it would. If you are interested, you can call the office and ask to be contacted when we have it on the schedule again. Thank you for watching this episode of Deep Dive. This is Darren Sweeney. Have a great day.